The moment the police cruiser rolled into our neighborhood, Karen folded her arms and smiled like she'd already won. She stood in the middle of my driveway, pointing at my wife as if she were a criminal. "There she is, officers," she shouted. "That's the woman who's been violating HOA rules for months. I want her arrested for trespassing, property damage, and refusing to obey the association." My wife didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look nervous. Instead, she calmly reached into her purse. Karen laughed. "Oh, don't bother looking for excuses. Your little driver's license isn't going to save you today." But it wasn't a driver's license. It was a dark navy credential with a polished federal seal. The moment the senior officer looked at it, his entire expression changed. His posture straightened. He quietly stepped back. Then he looked directly at Karen and asked one sentence that drained every drop of color from her face. "Ma'am, are you aware of who you've just filed a false report against?" Karen's confident smile disappeared instantly, because the woman she'd spent the last 3 months trying to bully wasn't just another homeowner. She was a federal investigator, and Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where arrogant people face the consequences of their own actions, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from. Now here's the question. If someone called the police on your family over something completely false, what would you do? Stay calm or fight back immediately? My name is Ethan Carter, and until recently, I believed moving into Willow Creek Estates would be the fresh start my wife and I desperately needed. After 15 years of renting apartments across 3 different states, we'd finally saved enough to buy our own home. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even the nicest house on the street, but it was ours. A quiet 2-story brick home with a small front porch, a maple tree in the yard, and just enough space for weekend barbecues with family. The neighborhood looked perfect. Clean sidewalks, fresh flowers, children riding bicycles, neighbors waving at each other. At least, that's what we thought during the first week. On the 8th day, someone knocked on our front door. Standing outside was a woman in her late 50s wearing designer sunglasses, expensive jewelry, and a bright red blazer that made her impossible to ignore. She never smiled. "You must be the new owners," she said. "I'm Karen Whitmore, the HOA president." She didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she looked past me, scanning every inch of our property as if she were conducting a military inspection. Her eyes stopped on a small flower planter near the porch. "That planter isn't on the approved landscaping list." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The flowers. They're the wrong color." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. My wife, Maya, stepped beside me. "We just planted those yesterday." Karen pulled a thick binder from under her arm and flipped through dozens of laminated pages. Section 14, subsection C, approved flowers are white, blue, or yellow. Purple flowers require written HOA approval. Maya looked at me. I looked at Karen. Neither of us could believe this conversation was actually happening. "We've only lived here for a week," Maya said politely. Karen shrugged. "Rules don't care how long you've lived here." Then she handed us an envelope. "Your first violation notice." As she walked away, she turned back one last time. "Oh, and you'll want to replace that mailbox too. It's 3 inches taller than the neighborhood standard." She smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that says, "I'm going to make your life miserable." At the time, we had no idea that those purple flowers were only the beginning, because within a few weeks, Karen wouldn't just be trying to fine us, she'd be calling the police on my wife and setting off a chain of events that would expose far more than anyone in the neighborhood was prepared for. The first violation notice should have been our warning. Instead, we laughed. Who finds someone over the color of flowers? Apparently, Karen Whitmore did. Over the next 3 weeks, the violation letters kept coming. One for leaving our trash can outside 23 minutes too long. Another because our welcome mat wasn't an approved neutral color. Then one claiming our American flag was mounted 2 inches lower than HOA guidelines recommended. Every letter ended the same way. Failure to comply may result in additional action. I wanted to fight every single notice, but Maya always stopped me. "Ethan," she said with a calm smile, "people like Karen want an argument. Don't give her one." That's who Maya was. Calm, patient, impossible to intimidate. She never raised her voice. She never insulted anyone. No matter how rude Karen became, Maya simply smiled and walked away. I admired that about her. What I didn't know was that she stayed so calm because dealing with difficult people was part of her job. One Saturday morning, I was washing my truck when Karen marched across my lawn without permission. She wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members followed behind her carrying clipboards. "Ethan!" she shouted. I turned off the water hose. "Can I help you?" She pointed toward our backyard. "We've received complaints that you've built an unauthorized structure." I frowned. "What structure?" "Your security cameras." I almost laughed. "They're security cameras. They're attached to my house. They don't need HOA approval." Karen opened her binder again. "The board disagrees. They're making homeowners uncomfortable." Before I could answer, Maya stepped outside holding 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning." Karen ignored the greeting. "Mrs. Carter, you're required to remove every camera within 48 hours. Maya calmly asked, "Can you show me the specific covenant that prohibits exterior security cameras?" Karen froze. She quickly flipped through page after page. Nothing. She couldn't find it. Finally, she slammed the binder shut. "I don't have to explain every rule. The board has authority." Maya smiled politely. "No, Mrs. Whitmore. The board has responsibilities. Authority still has legal limits." Karen's face turned bright red. "You people think you're smarter than everyone else." Maya simply took a sip of her coffee. "I'm asking a simple question. If the rule exists, I'm happy to read it." Karen turned around so quickly that one of her board members almost bumped into her. As she walked away, I heard her mutter, "This isn't over." That evening, our next-door neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, knocked quietly on our door. He looked nervous. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Karen held an emergency HOA meeting this afternoon." I exchanged a glance with Maya. "What about?" Mr. Jenkins lowered his voice. "She's furious. She said you've embarrassed her in front of the board. And now, she wants to make an example out of your family." Silence filled the room. "What does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "I heard her tell one of the board members, 'If they won't obey the HOA, we'll let the police deal with them.'" After he left, I looked at Maya. "Should we be worried?" She thought for a moment, then quietly said, "No, but we should be prepared." The following Monday morning, at exactly 9:12, Karen made the call she'd been waiting weeks to make. She picked up her phone, dialed 911, and reported that my wife was trespassing on HOA property and refusing to comply with lawful orders. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers were headed straight toward our home. Karen stood on the sidewalk with a satisfied smile. She honestly believed she had won. She had absolutely no idea. The person she was trying to have arrested spent her career investigating people who abused power. The sound of sirens echoed through Willow Creek Estates. 2 police cruisers rolled slowly onto our street. Karen couldn't hide her excitement. She stood at the edge of our driveway with her arms crossed, smiling as neighbors stepped onto their porches to watch. "This is what happens when people think they're above the rules," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. I looked at Maya. She remained unbelievably calm. No panic, no anger. She simply placed her coffee mug on the porch railing and quietly waited. The first officer stepped out, a tall man in his early 40s. His name tag read Sergeant Daniel Harris. He approached Karen first. "Ma'am, you're the one who called?" Karen immediately launched into her story. "Yes, Sergeant. This woman has been trespassing on HOA property for months. She refuses every lawful order we give her. She installed surveillance equipment without approval, damaged community property, and she's become a danger to this neighborhood." The officer listened carefully, then turned toward Maya. "Ma'am, I'd like to hear your side." Karen interrupted before Maya could speak. "There's nothing to hear. Arrest her." Sergeant Harris looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, I'll decide what happens here." Karen forced a smile, but didn't say another word. The officer walked toward us. "Good morning. I'm Sergeant Harris. We received a report of trespassing and property damage." Maya nodded politely. "Good morning, Sergeant. I'm Maya Carter. I understand." He glanced around our property. Everything looked perfectly normal. Fresh-cut grass, clean sidewalk, flowers blooming near the porch. Nothing suggested a crime had occurred. "What exactly happened today?" he asked. Maya calmly explained everything from the beginning: the violation notices, the repeated harassment, Karen entering our property without permission, the cameras, the threats. Sergeant Harris listened without interrupting once. Then he walked over to Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you show me where this alleged trespassing occurred?" Karen pointed toward our own front yard. "Right there." The sergeant looked confused. "You mean her own property?" Karen quickly corrected herself. "No. The HOA oversees the neighborhood. This entire area falls under our authority." The sergeant slowly nodded. "I understand. But this specific land belongs to the homeowners." Karen's smile disappeared. "You don't understand how HOAs work." Before the conversation could continue, a second officer approached carrying a small notebook. "Sergeant, I've spoken with 3 neighbors. They all say the Carters haven't caused any problems." Karen's face tightened. "They're lying. They're all against me." At that moment, Maya quietly reached into her handbag. Karen laughed loudly. "Oh, please, if you're looking for your driver's license, save yourself the embarrassment." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she removed a dark leather credential wallet. She opened it. Without saying a single word, she handed it to Sergeant Harris. He looked down. His eyes paused, then widened. For nearly 5 seconds, he didn't speak. His entire posture changed. He immediately closed the credential, handed it back respectfully, and took one small step backward. Karen noticed the sudden change. "What is it? What's so important?" The sergeant looked directly at Maya. "Ma'am? I wasn't aware you were with the Federal Office of Inspector General." Maya gave a small nod. "I normally don't mention my job." Karen laughed nervously. "So what? That doesn't change HOA rules." The sergeant slowly turned toward Karen. His expression was no longer casual. It was completely professional. "Mrs. Whitmore, it changes far more than you realize." And in that exact moment, Karen finally understood. She hadn't just called the police on another homeowner. She had filed a false complaint against a federal investigator. The smile she'd worn all morning vanished. The entire street fell silent. Karen stared at Maya, then at Sergeant Harris, then back at Maya again. For the first time since we'd moved into Willow Creek Estates, she looked uncertain. "There has to be some mistake," Karen said, forcing a laugh. "She's just trying to intimidate everyone." Sergeant Harris remained calm. "No, Mrs. Whitmore. I've verified her credentials. They're legitimate." Karen's smile disappeared. "But she's a homeowner." Maya slipped her credential back into her purse. "Yes, I also happen to work for the federal government. I wasn't here in any official capacity. I'm here as a private citizen who bought a home." Sergeant Harris nodded. "And that's exactly why this situation concerns me." He opened his notebook. "Mrs. Whitmore, you reported trespassing. Can you show me any evidence that Mrs. Carter was on property she wasn't legally allowed to enter?" Karen hesitated. "Well, the HOA governs the neighborhood." "That's not what I asked." The sergeant's voice remained professional. "Do you have evidence of trespassing?" Karen looked at the 3 HOA board members standing behind her. None of them spoke. One quietly looked away. Another slowly shook his head. The third suddenly found his phone extremely interesting. The silence said everything. Sergeant Harris continued. "Property damage?" Karen pointed toward the security cameras. "They installed those without permission." I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Officer, the cameras are attached to my house. They haven't damaged HOA property. They're entirely on our own property." The second officer walked over to inspect them. A minute later, he returned. "Sergeant, he's correct. No public property has been damaged." Karen's confidence was collapsing, but they refused to follow HOA rules. Sergeant Harris closed his notebook. "Mrs. Whitmore, HOA disputes are generally civil matters. They're not criminal matters. Based on everything we've seen today, I don't have probable cause to arrest anyone. Karen's face turned bright red. So you're just leaving? We're leaving because no crime has occurred. Then his expression became noticeably more serious. However, we now have questions regarding the accuracy of the information provided in your emergency call. Karen blinked. What does that mean? It means we're required to document whether emergency services were dispatched based on knowingly false information. The words hit her like a brick. I wasn't lying. Maya finally spoke. I don't believe you intended for things to go this far. But repeatedly using law enforcement to pressure your neighbors isn't an HOA power. It's something every community should think carefully about. The entire neighborhood was watching. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward. I'd like to make a statement. So would I, another neighbor said. Within seconds, 5 more homeowners walked toward the officers. Each had a different story. Threats, harassment, selective enforcement, baseless violation notices. Karen listened as neighbor after neighbor described the same pattern of behavior. For years, people had stayed quiet because they thought nobody would believe them. Today, that changed. As the officers finished collecting names and statements, one of the HOA board members quietly removed the badge from around his neck. He looked at Karen. I'm done. Another board member nodded. So am I. Karen stood alone in the middle of the street, watching the people who had supported her walk away, and she suddenly realized calling the police hadn't strengthened her authority.